The morning sky over Berlin looked like death itself. Gray smoke rose from buildings that once stood proud and tall. Now, there were nothing but broken walls and piles of stones. Greta Hoffman walked carefully through the streets, her thin shoes crunching on broken glass and debris. Every step hurt, but she had to keep moving. Her children were hungry again. It was February 1945, and the war was eating Germany alive. The Allies were closing in from all sides. The Soviet Red Army pushed from the east like an angry wave. The Americans and British bombed from the sky almost every night. The sound of explosions had become so normal that people barely flinched anymore. But the worst part was not the bombs. It was the hunger that twisted in everyone's belly like a knife. Greta pulled her threadbare coat tighter against the freezing wind. She was 32 years old, but looked 50. Her hands were rough and red from cold. Her face was thin, her eyes hollow. She had not seen her husband Karl in 8 months. He was somewhere on the Eastern Front, fighting the Russians. At least that is what his last letter said. That letter came in June. Now, it was February, and she heard nothing. Every day, she wondered if he was dead. She climbed over a fallen wall and searched through the rubble. Sometimes people left things behind when they fled. A can of food, a piece of cloth, anything useful. But today there was nothing except broken furniture and burnt photographs of people she did not know. Families that once lived here, now gone, dead or escaped. Nobody knew. Back home, her daughter Anna waited with her little brother Klaus. Anna was 8 years old. Klaus was only 5. They sat in their apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that was missing its entire front wall. You could see right into their rooms from the street. Cold wind blew through day and night. They hung blankets over the opening, but did nothing to stop the chill. Anna had learned to be silent when she was hungry. She did not cry anymore. Klaus still whimpered sometimes, asking for food, asking for Papa. Greta had no answers for him. The Nazi government had promised that Germany would win this war. They said the fatherland was strong. They said the German people would never surrender. But where were those Nazi officials now? Gone. Fled like rats from a sinking ship. They took the food supplies with them. The ration cards stopped working 2 weeks ago. The distribution centers were empty or destroyed. People ate whatever they could find. Some boiled leather belts to make soup. Others ate grass and tree bark. Children were dying from hunger and cold. Greta saw 3 small bodies being carried away just yesterday. Their mothers walked behind them with faces like stone. No tears left to see or why. As Greta walked back toward her building, she heard a weak cry. It came from the doorway of the building next to hers. She found her neighbor Elizabeth Schmidt collapsed against the wall. Elizabeth was a widow. Her husband died at Stalingrad 2 years ago. She had a baby born just 3 months ago in the middle of this hell. The baby was crying weakly in her arms. Greta knelt beside her. Elizabeth's face was pale as snow. Her lips were blue. The baby looked like a tiny skeleton wrapped in rags. Greta helped Elizabeth to her feet and half carried her inside. They climbed the stairs slowly. Each step was a battle. When they reached Elizabeth's apartment, Greta laid her on the mattress on the floor. The baby would not stop crying. That thin, desperate sound that meant only one thing: starvation. Elizabeth tried to feed him, but she had no milk. Her body was too weak, too hungry to produce anything. Greta looked at the baby and felt her heart break. This child will be dead within days, maybe hours. There was nothing anyone could do. She left Elizabeth and went back to her own apartment. Anna and Klaus looked up at her with hope in their eyes. Hope that died when they saw her empty hands. Greta had nothing to give them. She hugged them both and felt their thin bodies shaking from cold. Their ribs stuck out like the bars of a cage. Klaus's eyes were too big for his small face. Anna's hair was falling out in clumps from malnutrition. That evening, the neighbors gathered in the basement. It was safer there when the bombs fell. Someone said they heard American soldiers were coming. The U.S. Army was pushing into Germany from the west. They had crossed the Rhine River. They were getting closer to Berlin every day. The Nazi radio said the Americans were monsters who would kill everyone. The radio said they would burn the city and murder all Germans in revenge. An old man named Herr Weber spoke up. He had fought in World War I 30 years ago. He said war made men do terrible things. He said the Americans would show no mercy. After all, had Germany not started this war? Had the Nazis not invaded other countries and killed millions? Now the bill had come due, and Germany would pay in blood. Fear spread through the basement like poison. Women held their children closer. Some talked about suicide rather than facing the enemy. Greta listened to all this and felt nothing. She was too tired to be afraid, too hungry to care about anything except finding food for Anna and Klaus. That night, she lay between her two children on their thin mattress. She could feel their hearts beating against her. Small, weak beats. She stared at the ceiling where moonlight came through the holes in the roof. Somewhere far away, she heard the rumble of tanks. Getting closer. Always closer. She wondered if they would survive until morning. She wondered if survival even mattered anymore. Klaus whispered in the darkness, "Mama, when will Papa come home?" Greta had no answer. She just held him tighter and prayed to a god she was not sure existed anymore. Outside, the wind howled through the broken city like the ghost of Germany itself, mourning for what was lost and what would never return. The tanks came at dawn like metal beasts from a nightmare. Their engines roared through the empty streets of Berlin. The ground shook with each movement. Greta woke to the sound and knew immediately what it meant. The Americans had arrived. She grabbed Anna and Klaus and ran to the basement. Other families were already there, huddled in the darkness. About 30 people, mostly women, children, and old men. Anyone young and healthy had been taken for the war years ago. The women whispered frantically to each other. Some were crying. Some were praying. All were terrified. The Nazi propaganda had done its job well. For years, the radio and newspapers told Germans that the Americans were cruel savages. They said American soldiers would rape the women and kill the children. They said the Americans wanted revenge for all the destruction Germany had caused. Now, those Americans were right outside, and nobody knew what would happen next. Herr Weber had barricaded the basement door with furniture. It would not stop soldiers, but made people feel safer. Elizabeth sat in the corner with her baby. The child was barely moving now. His skin looked gray in the dim light. Greta knew he would not last another day without food. Lieutenant James Parker stood in the turret of his Sherman tank and surveyed the destruction around him. He was 26 years old, from a small farm in Iowa. He had been in Europe for 18 months, fighting from Normandy through France and now into Germany. He had seen terrible things. Dead soldiers, destroyed villages, concentration camps that made him sick to his soul. But this scene was different. This was a civilian neighborhood. The buildings were residential, not military, and they were obliterated. Some had collapsed completely. Others stood like broken teeth, their walls missing, their insides exposed to the world. Parker could see furniture still in the rooms. A kitchen table set for a meal that was never eaten. A child's bed hanging halfway out of a third-floor apartment. Personal belongings scattered everywhere, trampled into the mud. Sergeant Mike Sullivan rode in the tank behind Parker. He was a medic from Boston, 31 years old, with 3 kids back home. He had joined the army to fight fascism, to stop Hitler. But as he looked at this destroyed neighborhood, he felt only sadness. Where were the Nazi soldiers? Where were the enemy fighters? All he saw were ruins and empty streets. Parker's orders were clear. Secure the district. Check every building for remaining German troops. Establish control. The U.S. Third Army was moving fast now. Hitler's forces were collapsing. The war would be over soon, everyone said. But it did not feel like victory here. It felt like death. The units spread out, soldiers moving from building to building. They had learned to be careful. Sometimes German soldiers hid in basements or attics, waiting to ambush. Sometimes buildings were booby-trapped. You could never be too cautious. But as they searched, they found no soldiers. Only evidence of civilians who had fled or died. Private Tommy Chun from California was checking a collapsed building when he heard something. A small sound, like a whimper. He signaled to the others, and they approached carefully. The sound was coming from a basement. They found the barricaded door. Parker called out in German, words he had learned from a phrase book. "We are American Army. Come out. Nobody will hurt you." Silence. Then more whimpering. The sound of women's voices, hushed and afraid. Parker tried again. "We have food. We have medicine. Please come out." Still nothing. He nodded to two soldiers who pushed the door open, moving the furniture aside. What they saw made them stop cold. In the dim basement, dozens of faces stared back at them. Women with hollow cheeks and frightened eyes. Children so thin their bones showed through their skin. Old people who looked like walking corpses. The smell of unwashed bodies and sickness filled the air. These were not soldiers. These were survivors. For a long moment, nobody moved. The Americans stood at the door with their rifles. The Germans cowered in the shadows. Two groups of humans, separated by language and war, staring at each other across a divide of fear and hatred. Then a small boy, no more than 5 years old, broke away from his mother and ran forward. He was crying, holding a small photograph. Greta screamed, "Klaus!" and ran after him, sure the soldiers would shoot. But Klaus did not understand danger anymore. He only knew he was scared. He ran to his mother and dropped the photograph. It fluttered to the ground between the Americans and Germans. Parker bent down and picked it up. It showed a German soldier in uniform, smiling at the camera. Young and proud. Probably dead now. Parker thought. He looked at the boy clinging to his mother. He looked at the mother, thin and desperate, protecting her child. He looked at all the faces in that basement. And suddenly he saw his own family. His sister back in Iowa with her 2 kids. His mother who wrote him letters every week. His nephew Tommy, who was about the same age as this German boy. These people were enemies. Germany had started this war. German soldiers had killed his friends. His own brother died on Omaha Beach on D-Day, cut down by German machine guns. Parker had every reason to hate these people. Orders said to secure the area and move on. Nothing about helping civilians. But as he stood there, looking at that frightened little boy, something inside him broke. He handed the photograph back to Greta. Then he turned to Sergeant Sullivan. "Get on the radio. We need supplies. Food, blankets, medical equipment. Everything we can get. These people are starving." Sullivan stared at him. "Sir, is that protocol?" Parker looked him dead in the eye. "I don't care about protocol. Look at them. They are dying. We have supplies. We're going to help them." Some of the soldiers looked uncomfortable. They had been taught to hate the Germans, the enemy. But as they looked at the children with their big hollow eyes, at the mothers trying to protect them, at the old people too weak to stand, something shifted. These are not the Nazi soldiers they had been fighting. These are just people, victims of the same war. Parker spoke again in broken German. "Food is coming. Medicine is coming. You are safe now." 2 hours later, 3 supply trucks arrived. They came rumbling down the broken street, loaded with wooden crates stamped with U.S. Army markings. The soldiers began unloading boxes of K-rations, canned meat, powdered milk, bread, chocolate bars, and medical supplies. Things that had become like gold in this starving city. Parker ordered his men to bring the supplies into the street in front of the basement. The German civilians emerged slowly, like animals who had been trapped underground for months. They squinted in the daylight. They moved carefully, unsure if this was real or some kind of cruel trick. The Nazi propaganda had told them the Americans would torture them. Nothing had prepared them for this. Greta stood at the edge of the crowd, holding Anna and Klaus close to her. She watched the American soldiers opening crates and setting out food. Her mouth watered at the sight of real bread. Her stomach cramped with hunger so intense it felt like being stabbed. But she did not move forward. Pride and fear held her back. What if the food was poisoned? What if this was a trap to identify and arrest them? Sergeant Sullivan saw the hesitation in the crowd. He understood. These people had been taught to fear and hate Americans. Trust would not come easily. He picked up a can of condensed milk and a box of crackers. He walked slowly toward Elizabeth, who stood at the back with her dying baby. The infant's cries had become weak, barely audible. Sullivan had seen enough sick children in this war to know this one would not survive another day without help. He knelt down in front of Elizabeth and held out the milk. She stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. Sullivan opened the can and poured some into a cup. He made drinking motions, trying to show her it was for the baby. Elizabeth looked at the milk, then at her son's gray face, then back at the American soldier. Her hand shook as she reached out. When her fingers touched the can, she burst into tears. The sound of her crying broke something in the crowd. Other women started weeping too, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief and disbelief. An American soldier was giving them food. He was helping them. It was the opposite of everything they had been told. Elizabeth fell to her knees, sobbing, clutching the milk to her chest. She could not speak. She just nodded again and again, tears streaming down her face. Sullivan helped her to her feet and guided her to sit down. He showed her how to mix the powdered milk with water for the baby. The infant drank weakly at first, then stronger. Color began to return to his tiny face. Elizabeth kept crying, kept nodding at Sullivan, unable to find words for what she felt. The medic had seen a lot in this war, but this moment hit him hard. He had to turn away and wipe his own eyes. That broke the dam. Other mothers began coming forward, holding their children. The soldiers distributed food and blankets. Private Chin opened a box of Hershey chocolate bars and handed them to the kids. Most of the children had never tasted chocolate in their lives. Sugar had been rationed since before they were born. Klaus bit into his bar, and his eyes went wide with wonder. For a moment, he forgot about the war, the hunger, the cold. He just stood there with chocolate on his face, experiencing joy for the first time in months. Anna took her chocolate and immediately broke it in half. She gave one piece to a smaller child who had none. Greta watched her daughter do this and felt her heart break and heal at the same time. Even in this hell, kindness survived. Even among starving children, sharing still existed. She had been so afraid that the war had destroyed everything good in the world. But watching Anna and Klaus and the other children eating chocolate, laughing for the first time in forever, she felt hope stir in her chest like a small flame. Still, she did not take food for herself. She stood apart, watching. Her pride would not let her accept charity from the enemy. Her husband was out there somewhere, fighting these same Americans. How could she take their food? It felt like betrayal. It felt like surrender. Parker noticed her standing alone. He walked over, carrying a blanket and a box of rations. He had learned a few more German phrases from one of his men who spoke the language. "For your children," he said in rough German. "Please take it." Greta shook her head. Parker tried again. "I have sister. She has children too. Same age as yours. If she was here, I would want someone to help her." Greta looked at this American officer. He was young, probably younger than Carl. He had kind eyes, tired eyes, eyes that had seen too much death. She opened her mouth to refuse again, but then Anna collapsed beside her. The little girl's legs just gave out. She fell into the mud, unconscious from weakness. Greta screamed and dropped to her knees. Sullivan was there in seconds, checking Anna's pulse, her breathing. "Malnutrition," Sullivan said to Parker. "She is severely undernourished, probably anemic. She needs food and warmth immediately." He looked up at Greta. "Your daughter is very sick. She needs help now." Greta's pride shattered like glass. She nodded frantically, tears pouring down her face. Sullivan carried Anna to one of the trucks and laid her inside. He wrapped her in thick army blankets and gave her water mixed with sugar. Slowly, the girl's eyes fluttered open. Greta climbed into the truck and held her daughter. Parker handed her the box of rations. This time she took it. She opened a can of beans with shaking hands and fed Anna small spoonfuls. Klaus climbed up beside them, and Parker gave him another chocolate bar and a wool blanket. The boy looked at the American lieutenant with something like worship in his eyes. "Thank you," Greta whispered in English, the only English word she knew. Parker nodded. He did not need more words. The look on her face said everything. He turned away, but not before Greta saw tears in his eyes too. Private Tommy Chun sat on the ground with a group of children around him. He was showing them pictures from his wallet. His wife, his parents, his little sister. The kids pointed and asked questions he could not understand. But somehow they communicated anyway, through gestures and smiles, through shared humanity. One little girl showed him a tattered doll. He smiled and pretended the doll was dancing. The children laughed. Real laughter. The sound was strange in this place of death and destruction. As evening fell, more supplies arrived. Soldiers set up a field kitchen and cooked hot soup. The smell of food brought more people out from hiding. Soon there were about 100 civilians gathered, eating the first real meal they had in weeks. Some cried while they ate. Some ate so fast they got sick. Sullivan had to tell them to slow down, that their stomachs could not handle too much at once. Weber approached Lieutenant Parker. The old man stood straight and gave a military salute, tears running down his weathered face. He spoke in German, and one of the soldiers translated. "I fought against America in the last war. I hated your country. But today, you showed me something I forgot. That soldiers can still be human. That enemies can show mercy. Thank you for saving my neighbors. Thank you for saving the children." Parker shook the old man's hand. He thought about his brother who died on D-Day. He thought about all his friends killed by German soldiers. He should hate these people. But standing here, seeing their gratitude, their tears, their thin faces, he could not hate them. They were victims too. Victims of Hitler. Victims of war. Just people trying to survive. 2 weeks passed. The American unit stayed in the district longer than planned. Parker had convinced his commanding officer that holding this area required maintaining civilian cooperation. But the truth was simpler. He could not leave these people to starve. His conscience would not allow it. The soldiers set up a makeshift aid station in a building that still had most of its walls and roof. Sullivan worked there every day, treating sick children, infected wounds, pneumonia, frostbite, and dozens of other ailments. Medicine that would have been thrown away in America saved lives here. A simple bottle of aspirin was like magic. Antibiotics were miracles. Bandages and antiseptic were treasures beyond measure. Greta became Sullivan's assistant. She organized the other women, translated between German civilians and American soldiers, and helped distribute supplies fairly. Her English was improving rapidly. She learned medical terms from Sullivan. Words like infection, fever, medicine, bandage. Practical words that saved lives. Anna and Klaus grew stronger each day. Color returned to their cheeks. They started playing again like normal children. Klaus followed the American soldiers everywhere, fascinated by their trucks and weapons. Anna helped serve food to younger children. One evening, Parker and Greta sat on the steps of a destroyed building, watching the sunset. The sky was orange and red, beautiful despite the ruins around them. Greta asked Parker about his family. He told her about his brother who died at Normandy Beach. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The day Allied forces invaded France to begin liberating Europe from Nazi control. His brother's name was Robert. He was 23 years old. A bullet through the chest as he ran from the landing craft. He died in the surf before he even reached the sand. Greta listened and felt shame burn in her chest. German soldiers had killed Parker's brother. Yet here Parker sat, feeding her children, saving her neighbors. She told him about Karl, how he had been a teacher before the war, how the Nazi government conscripted him in 1943, how he did not want to fight, but had no choice. They shot deserters. They arrested families of men who refused service. You fought or you died, and your family died with you. Parker listened without judgment. He was beginning to understand that ordinary Germans were trapped just like everyone else. The Nazi government had controlled everything. The police, the military, the newspapers, the radio. If you spoke against Hitler, you disappeared. If you helped Jews, you were executed. The German people had been prisoners in their own country. Now, they were prisoners of war's aftermath, but not everyone felt the same way Parker did. One afternoon, a captain from another unit visited their position. Captain Morrison was a hard man from Texas. He had fought across North Africa and Italy. He had seen concentration camps. He had liberated Dachau and seen the piles of bodies, the gas chambers, the living skeletons behind barbed wire. He had no sympathy for any German, civilian, or soldier. Morrison confronted Parker in front of the other men. "What the hell are you doing, Lieutenant? This is not a charity mission. These are Germans. The enemy. Their soldiers killed millions. Their government tried to take over the world. And you're giving them our supplies?" Parker stood his ground. "Sir, with respect, these are not soldiers. They are women and children. They are starving. We have supplies to spare. Morrison's face turned red with anger. They should starve. They should suffer. That is justice for what Germany did. My men found a concentration camp last month. Children murdered in gas chambers. Thousands of them. And you want me to feel sorry for German kids? The other soldiers listened in uncomfortable silence. Both men had valid points. The moral weight was crushing. Parker spoke quietly but firmly. I saw those camps too, sir. Buchenwald. I will never forget it as long as I live. The Nazis who did that deserve every punishment we can give them. But these people here, they did not run those camps. Most did not even know they existed. They were lied to by their own government. Their men were forced to fight. Their cities were bombed. They are victims too. Morrison shook his head. You are naive, Parker. They voted for Hitler. They cheered when Germany invaded Poland. They are guilty. Parker nodded. Some are guilty, but not all. Not the children. Not the babies. If we punish everyone equally, we become as bad as the Nazis. We lose our humanity. We lose what we are fighting for. The argument ended with no resolution. Morrison left angry, promising to report Parker's actions. Parker knew his military career might end badly, but he could not change his mind. Watching Klaus play with toy soldiers Private Shun had carved from wood, seeing Anna smile for the first time, knowing Elizabeth's baby would live, those things mattered more than his career. That night, Greta came to Parker with urgent news. A man had returned to the district. His name was Friedrich Ziegler. He had been a local Nazi party official before the war ended. When the Americans came, he fled. Now he was back, trying to reassert control. He told the Germans they should not cooperate with the Americans. He called Greta a traitor for helping them. He said Germany would rise again and punish collaborators. Parker and 4 soldiers went to confront Ziegler. They found him in a basement, trying to organize a resistance group. But when the American soldiers entered, something unexpected happened. German civilians, led by Herr Weber and several women, stood between Ziegler and the Americans. They told Parker that Ziegler was the real enemy. This man had sent their husbands to die in pointless battles. He had taken their food while they starved. He had reported families to the Gestapo for speaking against the war. He was guilty of real crimes. The women demanded justice. American justice, not Nazi justice. They wanted Ziegler arrested and tried properly. Parker was stunned. 2 weeks ago, these people feared Americans. Now, they trusted American law more than German authority. It was a profound moment, a symbol of how completely the Nazi system had collapsed and how quickly trust could grow when backed by genuine kindness. Sullivan also made a discovery that week. One of the families he treated, the Hoffman family, was hiding a 9-year-old girl named Rachel. She was Jewish. Her parents had been taken by the Gestapo in 1943. Greta's neighbor, Frau Hoffman, had hidden Rachel for 2 years, risking her life every single day. If discovered, the Nazis would have killed her entire family. Yet she did it anyway because it was right. When Sullivan learned this, he brought Rachel chocolate and medicine. He told Frau Hoffman she was a hero. The old woman wept and said she was no hero. She said she only did what any decent person should do. But Sullivan knew better. In a nation consumed by evil, ordinary courage had survived. Hidden in basements and attics, protected by people who risked everything humanity had endured. April 1945 arrived with the first warm days of spring. Flowers pushed up through the rubble, stubborn and hopeful. On April 30th, news came over the radio that shook the world. Adolf Hitler was dead. He had committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin as Soviet troops closed in. The Nazi government was collapsing. Germany would surrender soon. The war in Europe was nearly over. The reaction in the district was complicated. Some people cried with relief. Others felt only emptiness. 12 years of Nazi rule had destroyed Germany. 6 years of war had killed millions. And for what? For nothing. For a madman's dream of conquest. The wasted lives, the destroyed cities, the murdered innocents. All for nothing. On May 7th, Germany officially surrendered to the Allied forces. The war was over. Greta received news the next day that made her collapse to her knees. Karl was alive. He was in a Soviet prisoner of war camp somewhere in eastern Germany. The Red Cross had sent word. He was sick and wounded but alive. She would not see him for months, maybe years. The Soviets were not releasing prisoners quickly, but he was alive. That single fact filled her with more joy than she thought possible. Anna and Klaus danced around her, shouting, "Papa is alive. Papa is coming home." But joy was mixed with sorrow. The neighborhood had lost so many. 15 men would never return. 8 children had died from hunger and disease before the Americans arrived. 3 elderly people had frozen to death. The cost of the war was written in every family's face. Victory for the Allies meant defeat for Germany, but also liberation from the Nazi nightmare. The feelings were too complicated for simple words. Parker's unit received orders to move out. They were needed elsewhere. The occupation of Germany was being organized. Different units would take over different districts. Parker had 2 days to prepare his men to leave. When word spread among the German civilians, the reaction surprised even him. People wept openly. Women brought small gifts, things they had nothing to spare but gave anyway. Hand-sewn handkerchiefs, drawings by children, a carved wooden cross from her Weber. Elizabeth came to Parker holding her baby. The child was healthy now, chubby and smiling. She had named him James after the lieutenant who saved his life. She tried to thank him in broken English. "You give life. You give hope. We never forget." Parker held the baby and felt tears in his eyes. This child would grow up in a better world. A world without Hitler, without war, that had to mean something. The night before the Americans left, the neighborhood organized a gathering in the street. They shared what little food they had. Someone found a working radio and played music. American swing jazz mixed with German folk songs. Children ran around playing while adults talked quietly. Former enemies sat together, sharing cigarettes and stories. Private Chun taught German kids an American card game. Klaus sat on Sullivan's lap, falling asleep against the medic's chest. Greta approached Parker with Anna beside her. The girl held out a folded piece of paper. Parker opened it and saw a drawing. It showed an American soldier giving food to a German family. Below it, Anna had written in careful English letters, "Thank you for save us." The grammar was wrong, but the meaning was perfect. Parker could not speak. He just hugged the little girl and tried not to see our WWII darkness fell. People began to sing. First German songs, then someone who knew English started Amazing Grace. The voices mixed together, American and German, singing about grace and redemption. Sullivan stood with his arm around Elizabeth, who held baby James. Her Weber stood at attention, saluting both the American flag on the truck and the memory of all who died. Klaus clung to Parker's leg, not wanting him to leave. Greta pulled Parker aside. They walked a short distance from the crowd. She spoke in halting English, better now after weeks of practice. "I want to tell you something. When you first come, I hate you. I think you enemy. I think you hurt my children. But you show me that people more important than politics. That kindness more strong than hate. You saved my children life. You saved many life. I never forget this. When my husband come home, I tell him about American soldiers who show mercy." Parker took her hand. "Your husband is lucky, man. You are strong and brave. You survived something terrible. Now you must help rebuild. Germany needs people like you. Good people who will make sure this never happens again. Teach your children about what happened. Make sure they remember the cost of hate and war." Greta nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise. Anna and Klaus will know. All German children must know. So this never happen again." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people from enemy nations who had become friends through shared humanity. Then Greta did something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. She hugged the American officer, not as enemies, not as conquerors and conquered, but as 2 human beings who had found hope in hell. The next morning, the trucks were loaded. Soldiers said their goodbyes. Sullivan gave his medical bag to Greta. "You know how to use this now. Help people. Save lives." Private Chun left his hand-carved toys for the children. Other soldiers left behind extra blankets, food supplies, and medical equipment. Things they could spare. Things that would keep people alive a little longer. As the convoy prepared to leave, the entire neighborhood lined the street. German civilians waving at American soldiers. Klaus broke free from his mother and ran after Parker's truck, crying. Parker had the driver stop. He jumped down and hugged the boy one last time. He gave Klaus his army cap, way too big for the small head. "Be good," Parker said in German. "Take care of your mama and sister." Klaus nodded, unable to speak through his tears. The trucks rolled away slowly. Parker looked back and saw Greta standing with Anna and Klaus. 3 survivors. 3 reasons why showing mercy mattered. Behind them, the neighborhood was already changing. People were clearing rubble, starting to rebuild. The work would take years, maybe decades. But it would happen. Life would return to these streets. As the convoy moved through Berlin, Parker saw other American units. Some were treating civilians kindly. Others were not. He understood both reactions. The war had been terrible. The crimes committed by Nazi Germany were horrific. Forgiveness was hard, maybe impossible for some. But he also knew that peace could not be built on revenge, only on justice, mercy, and the recognition that most people, regardless of what side they were born on, just wanted to live, love their families, and survive. Greta watched the trucks disappear around a corner. She held her children close and looked at the ruins around her. Germany was destroyed. Millions were dead. The Nazi nightmare had ended but left behind devastation. Yet standing there with Anna and Klaus, alive and fed, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. The American soldiers had given them more than food and medicine. They had given them proof that humanity could survive even the darkest evil, that kindness could exist even in war, that enemies could become friends, that maybe, just maybe, the world could be better. She took her children's hands and walked toward home, ready to rebuild, ready to remember, ready to make sure the lessons of this terrible war were never forgotten.